on, no interruptions, nobody. Like for a recluse like me, it's like pretty much paradise, you know?
That's what I'm saying. It's affecting people so different. I don't want to celebrate the pandemic, but I'm also like, in a lot of ways, it's affected my life in a positive way, for sure.
There's definitely upsides to this. Like, and you know, if you have the right attitude and you look at it, you know, as not from a place of fear and a panic and everything, like, for sure things can be turned around and things can be looked at from a different perspective. And, you know, a lot of people are doing that, and I'm one of them. Like, I'm just, you know, getting through this like better than ever right now, honestly, which is, I'm sorry to say that, like, because I know there are a lot of people that aren't, and, you know, but it's remarkable that, you know, creative people especially, like, find ways to improvise a lot, I think, you know, and I'm lucky that I have this outlet, you know, the studio here.
Thank God for the internet.
And memes. YouTube or Instagram memes.
I've been watching YouTube a lot because Netflix is a little more stagnant. Like, you're not going to see as many new shows. Yeah. And YouTube, you get people just dropping stuff on the daily. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of you're getting that current news, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, we're in a weird time. Well, in the last 10 years, really. Like, since the advent of Twitter, where, like, we get news before CNN, you know? Yeah. We find shit out, like, on YouTube, on Instagram. Like, I swear to God, I get a lot of my news from podcasts, because, like, I don't go out of my way, and I really should, to, like, do more worldly research and stuff. But I find that I can just rely on the entertainment outlets that I have to give me, like, the elevator pitch of what's happening. Like, without having to skim through 50 articles, I can kind of, like, watch a couple shows here. They'll discuss some current things that are factual, and I'll be like, oh, okay, cool. Like, you know, kind of getting up to date a little bit.
Dude, 100%. I had my birthday March 20th. Mm-hmm. I just turned 30. And it's funny because I feel like that's supposed to be a milestone, and the whole year, like, building up to it, I was thinking, what am I going to do? Like, this kind of pressure, you want to celebrate and have fun. And I basically spent it in my house on Zoom and on FaceTime. And it's funny because when you reach out to other people, everyone's in the same boat. Everyone's at home. Mm-hmm. So at least, like, if you reach out, there's no excuse for someone to be at work, or not many people at least. So it's definitely an odd birthday, and I live alone. So I was literally just in my apartment in front of my laptop all day. But yeah, man, that was kind of where it started to become real. Yeah. Because I know with your work, they gave you a 2-week window and basically said, we're reopening stores on like March 29th or something.
That was the original. No, it was the 27th, which is my wife's birthday. That's how I remember. And that is come and gone.
Yeah, maybe like 2021. Yeah. But yeah, and I'm in school right now, as you know, and that's basically postponed indefinitely. So I bought a monitor. I got a webcam and a keyboard, and just basically got like a really dialed in setup, because I'm spending like 8 hours at the computer every day. Yeah. But
when you say monitor, like, because you have a laptop, so it'd be like an external monitor is what you mean?
Yeah. I had an Asus like years ago, got rid of that, and then I got a BenQ. Yeah. And it's just better, man. 27-inch monitor for multitasking. Oh, God, yeah. Even, like, that's not why I bought it, but when I do open Logic projects, oh, man, you can have full visibility and not have to close the mixing window portion or... Yeah, I feel like you just mix with less stress. You have more clarity in your mind, and your visibility is just a lot wider.
Yeah, I mean, it's like having a big cutting board, and you can, like, separate all your vegetables, as opposed to, like, I don't know, doing it in the back of a van. You know? Like, you have a workspace. It's a big palette, you know? And the interesting thing about, like, the size of the monitor is, like, the session doesn't scale with the size of the monitor. So you, like, if you get a bigger monitor, you literally see more. It's not just like scaled down and proportionately with a smaller monitor. It's like a 27 inch is like, yeah, man, you can see the whole session there. Like, it's great.
On top of that, when I was here maybe a month ago, you showed me a bunch of shortcut keys, the double T.
The Logic shortcuts,
and then the command with the arrows to kind of zoom in and out really quickly.
And down,
and now that you build that muscle memory and it's just kind of instilled in you, when you're navigating through a project, it's so seamless.
Yeah.
I used to actually go in and click like the blade and then click back to the pointer. And it's like I was wasting so much time and it was also just not as fun.
No, it ruins the immersion, like the flow, the creativity. Like when you master your shortcuts and you're fucking Paul Beckler out there, like just flying, you know, and then you're in the groove a lot more.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah. And then most important of all, like reduces the amount of time you're spending, so you can like get so much more done, right? Like,
it's funny too, wrapping up this project that I'm doing right now is like I did all of it on a laptop for so long.
Yeah.
And then having this monitor immediately gave me like a fresh set of eyes. And I've approached every song again and kind of been able to make changes in a very different light. And it's hard to explain that, but it's just, you have this new environment basically to work on.
Yeah.
And you hear it differently. And it allows you to, it's so rare that you get a chance to get fresh eyes or fresh ears on something, especially when you've heard it so many times.
Yeah.
But when the setup changes, it changes your perspective, I guess.
So what are some of like the big changes that you made?
Okay, so
breakthroughs or the aha moments.
The aha moments.
Like since working on this, or from like revision 1 to revision 2.
So the first thing that I did with this project in general is I broke down the steps of what I wanted to focus on. So instead of maybe doing one song start to finish, I basically wrote all the songs, recorded all the beds, and then once everything was actually recorded, I would do compression for all the songs. Like I remember I came here, you helped basically dial in compression for one of the songs. And I would do that. Then I would focus on EQ again for all the songs. And I would kind of go through in stages.
Oh, interesting.
That way the project ended kind of like simultaneously.
Yeah.
Just all at once, like a few days ago. And I feel like it's better, man, because if you don't have a system in place, or you don't have kind of any guidance with how you're going to approach things, it can get really messy.
Yeah.
Like your project itself can get messy.
Yeah,
the plugins,
overwhelming,
when you're bouncing between file and file, you're going to forget what you did to the settings. So I feel like if you kind of go through and logically like tackle one thing at a time, it makes a really big difference. So I would just say I was diligent with this project. I definitely took it a lot slower. I kind of took it in stride.
Yeah.
And I was able to take breaks. I think like realistically, no one's, you shouldn't be rushing anything, you know?
Yeah. I mean, unless you're working for a label and they want like a song mixed tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it's like, 11:30 p.m. It's due in the morning or something. I mean, you do hear about that a lot, where it's like, there's like these super stressed deadlines, but that's at like the really highest level, right? But you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, we want, this is art. This is our outlet. This is our passion. This shouldn't be stress. This should be like my favorite thing to do, your favorite thing to do, right? So
yeah. And I think I'm getting back to that, which feels good.
Yeah.
I guess another like aha moment is just not being biased. It's so easy to think, oh, this is my song, this is dope. And I've become a little better at cutting verses or restructuring lyrics or being like, you know what, this song doesn't fit in this project, or whatever the case may be. Like, be okay with cutting those things out rather than falling in love with what you've done.
That's hard to do.
It is. You have to have that objective point of view.
Yeah.
But I think giving yourself space and time, if you come back to something after a week and you have that fresh set of ears, you're going to really notice like things are going to stand out. And if you've listened to something 20 times, which I really try not to do, sometimes you'll lay beds and get kind of a decent mix down and then do a quick master. And then you might put it on your phone, start listening in a car or whatever. And now you've listened to this like rough mix 20 times, which is now embedded in your brain as like the song.
And the balance of where everything sits. Yeah.
And then going in and changing that when it's already so kind of locked in is really difficult.
Because at that point, you should almost be giving it to someone else.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I've got this, I've worked on this, I've got this to a point, and I've lost perspective, you know? So that's really hard. Like, the biggest part about that is definitely taking time off from it and then listening to it in different environments, you know?
And trying not to bounce. I used to just bounce 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 just because I wanted to hear a mastered version. Whereas with this, I thought, okay, I'm going to, work on the mix, hit save, and then close Logic. And then I'll come back to it. That way I'm not listening to this final bounced thing and I don't put it on my phone. And I was purposely giving myself that space.
Amazing.
So I feel like that, again, just being super unbiased and actually seeing it hopefully more from the perspective of a listener.
Right.
Because the more you give yourself 1 week or 2 weeks and then you come back to that mix, I mean, you're never going to really see it from their point of view because you wrote the lyrics and you were involved in it. But that's like, no one knows when that hook's coming. No one knows where your direction is going, where the beat's going. And it's really hard to put yourself in someone's shoes like that. Just because you get so immersed in the project.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
now obviously, when you're working on your own music, that is a luxury that you can have, to take 2 weeks on a mix or more. And I've been there many times. But from myself, when I'm lately a change that has really worked for me and an improvement I've made when I'm mixing for clients and I don't have 2 weeks, I maybe have like 2 days.
Yeah.
They want it by like, I want to release this Friday night. I'm like, okay, I'll get it to you by Friday night. But in the past, I used to just work on stuff beyond ear fatigue and just push through it and try and EQ and compress stuff when my ears were just ruined, right? Because I bet I had my headphones on for hours and I was just going.
Yeah.
But since in the past year or so, when like Studio B has really come together and I have no equipment at home now whatsoever, coming to the studio now is like where I do the work, and then I give myself like a slot and I'm going to say, okay, I'm working on this for 6 hours. I'm saving it and I'm done. And I don't try and mix like 3 or 4 songs in a day anymore and like bounce between sessions. I used to do that a lot, and I'd like work something to 40%, work something else to 50%, and then have a bunch of like a ton of shit that was like not finished but like in the works. Now I'll like start something, take a break, come back the next day and finish it. Kind of like a day is a mix.
Yeah.
And that has really worked for me. Like, I've gotten to the results I want to get to so much quicker now just by coming into it with fresh ears, sleeping on it, and then treating like a studio session like today is for this record. Today is for this purpose. One singular focus. I'm not going to mess around with a bunch of shit. I'm coming in to do this mix, and my God, like the efficiency that I'm getting lately is great. It's milestone shit, like breakthrough shit, and I'm really glad for that. So having I don't have any like mentors, I would say, here that I physically meet with, but lots and lots of online stuff, watching a lot of stuff and hearing like the top guys talk about their work process. That really inspired me, and I started using it, and it's paying off.
It's like having that self-awareness about your ear fatigue, about how many hours you've put in today. And I guess with having this studio set up, it's kind of like a mind state. When you get here, it's like when you get to, you know, a workplace.
Yeah.
You kind of have to flick that switch, and this is where I do my stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a familiar environment. You're comfortable. You're super familiar with where everything is and how it works. And I imagine your setup is pretty dialed in. So when you are tracking or mixing, you can just turn things on and it works, which makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it took years to get to that, you know, years of just doing shit incorrectly and making so many mistakes and just reworking things over and over and over and over again and not knowing why it wasn't coming together. And I was telling my wife a couple days ago about, you know, a mix that I finished, and the first time I had gone through it, it was just torture, right? Like someone sends me a vocal that's really poorly recorded, and you know, there's proximity effect like crazy, and the mic pre's turned up way too high, so it's all sizzly and just crispy, and it just sounds like it's like a crap vocal, right? And then on top of that, they're like, okay, here's my beat. It's like a YouTube beat. So I'm like, oh my God, I got to make these two things sound good. And so I went back to this session, right, that I hadn't opened for months. And I'm looking at this session because I have to finish this song. So I'm coming into it with like a bit of an ear break, which is good, and fresh perspective. And I'm looking through my session at like all the plugins I've got on this vocal, and like the Fab Filter Pro Q with like all this like surgical stuff, just cutting out all the shit that was just driving me nuts, and just like way too many plugins, right? And I was like, God, this is a mess. And I listened to it, and I'm like, it still sounds bad. Like I'm still not happy with this. So I just said, fuck it, I'm gonna strip everything down. I just started from scratch. And you know, got within like 25 minutes, got a way better vocal, and like with like 4 plugins, you know, because I took a totally different approach, but did it the right way, you know, efficiently.
Right.
And it was like, I was like, holy shit. Like it was one of those like, holy shit moments. I was like so stoked about it, you know? And yeah, like in 25, 30 minutes. And then I just printed the mix, and I was like, this is it. This is, wow. Like all of this practice and research and watching tutorials and videos and getting super obsessed is like paying off, you know? And it was like, it was such a good feeling. So
it's weird how that learning curve kind of hits you.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying with not rushing the project and having some kind of visibility with where you're going, because there's no point in rushing the recording. The recording is the foundation for the entire song. So if you're 100%. Not going to get a good recording and those beds are sloppy, you're right. If you get past 4 or 5 plugins and start hitting 6, 7, 8, I mean, that is going through so many different channels, and that signal is just getting destroyed.
It's degrading.
And it's going to sound more robotic. And you're right, the quality is going to go down, and it doesn't even sound like the person anymore.
No.
You know, that's another thing I noticed is when somebody listens, they're really going to think this isn't you. And then if you come to perform that, I mean, the risk of you having like what are the mics that are super common? The SM7B.
The 58.
Yeah. If you have one of those and it's just compressed a little bit with a little EQ, it's going to sound nothing like the song you released on iTunes or Apple Music or Spotify.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, that's the biggest thing. And I know you're probably figuring that out too, is just figuring out steps and being able to step back and think, okay, there's the end goal of me like having this mastered song. And it's like, how do I tackle this one thing at a time? and do it properly.
Oh, totally.
Because, man, the end product, you know, everyone's going to get there in a different sense, but you got to figure out what works for you. And I don't know. I just took my sweet ass time with this. And I think the end result is something that's not only sounds better, but when I listen to it, I can feel like, okay, I actually listened to this a lot, and I took enough months in between where I'm confident that like every second of this song doesn't have, you know, an area that clips or a weird breath. You know, I've really like gone through the marquee tool. Life changer.
Yeah.
I used to use a gate, and it would always have this weird kind of like bounce back, and it would always chop out certain words. And it's like how a de-esser sometimes, if it's not used correctly, makes you sound like you have a lisp.
Totally.
And that's just another example of a plugin that could probably just be an EQ thing, or it could even just be a performance thing, or having the right pop filter or the right kind of foam on the mic. So it's just, it goes back to that recording process. Like with the SM7 that I had, it was going through Cloud Lifter for the first time. And as we said, completely changes your ability just to get something clean right off the bat.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be in Logic, like slamming the compressor or slamming gain or like bringing the actual volume meter over 0.
Never do that, people.
I've seen, like if it's bouncing into the red and you're tracking, not good. Like, it's funny, right?
Yeah. But we've all made those mistakes, right? Like,
yeah. Also, it makes you realize, you know, there's no way anyone who's professional, which is what you want to be. You know, if you put this many years into it, you're like, listen, I want to be a professional and I need to take these steps and I don't want to rush it. And I need to make sure that at the end of the day, when I do publish it, it's going to sound as close to the rest of people's songs when they put me on a playlist.
Yeah.
So
you're narrowing the gap, you know, a little by little with all these improvements and all of this, you know, technique. And I'm glad that you mentioned that you're spending more time with the, you know, just spending more time in general, but with the details and things, but like getting the recording right is, you know, I overlooked that for so many years.
Dude, everyone does.
Years, man. Like, I'm ashamed to say. And I used to hear, you know, instructors at school say things like, oh, that album was so well recorded. And that just went like right over my head. I'm thinking like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, you just put mics there and they show up. Like, no, like the art of recording. That's why they're, you know, when you go to if people still have CDs at home, I still have tons of CDs.
Yeah.
Flip through the booklet and there's like the person's name who wrote the lyrics, the songwriter is always first, and then producer, and then, you know, recorded by. That person gets a credit because that is a very important job.
Yeah.
That is a expertise. And then mixed by, right?
Yeah.
But Jesus Christ, man, like I just always couldn't wait to get to the mix. I was always just like, okay, I've got my lyrics, let's just get it out, record it, and then I can start having fun and like putting reverb on it and automation and just, you know, playing with it. But goddamn, like getting the foundation, you use that word, like getting that right from the get-go will save you so much headache and time and stress. For years and years, I was just fixing. I wasn't mixing. I spent 80-90% of the time on what I thought was the mix, just fixing it so that it didn't sound bad. You know what I mean? I thought when a mix was done, it was like, oh, it doesn't hurt my ears. This is mixed now.
Be okay with spending time recording.
Totally. And
Be okay with spending time getting the levels correct. There's this
100%.
weird thing where you want to rush into sitting down and mixing.
yeah.
And you want to be able to like unplug the mic, which is the wrong attitude to have.
Oh my God, man. It is the most important. Like, it's the foundation. It's like, it's like if you're cooking, it's like, this is the best quality beef I could buy. After that, like, you don't need a bunch of sauce.
Yeah.
Just a bit of salt. You know what I mean? It's like, but if you get the crappy caged eggs, you know, no amount of like heat, doesn't matter what frying pan you used, it doesn't matter like the hot sauce, whatever. Like, if you don't have the foundation, if the foundation is shit, if it's low quality, you can't build on that.
Like when I started Nimbus in 2013 or 14, I remember going in with this mentality of, okay, I have my laptop, I have this project I've recorded.
Yeah.
And I remember approaching some of the staff teachers there and being like, okay, like what plugin do you guys have that you're not telling me about?
Yeah, what's the secret?
Yeah, I remember literally like turning my laptop over and being like, can you EQ this so I sound like whoever?
Yeah.
And they're like, no.
That's not what...
And I didn't understand.
Yeah.
There's this gap of, I thought people had secrets, you know, which is to some extent true, but a lot of those secrets are based on technique, not necessarily clicking buttons in a plugin. They're helpful, and you're right, they're going to elevate it to a certain extent, but if the foundation is sloppy, you can't bring that to a 10.
No.
So
you can't. It's these secrets or techniques are fine. Like, the best mix engineers in the world put out videos on Mix with the Masters, which is a very expensive subscription that I subscribe to for mixing videos.
I remember you hit me up for that.
And it's like, you can sit there for 2 hours and watch Chris Lord-Alge mix a rock song from scratch. And he's like, okay, I'm putting 10 dB of gain at 8K on this snare. He'll tell you exactly what he's doing every fucking step. It's not like there's one secret. The key is how you put all of these techniques together. That's what makes a great mix. That's what makes an art, like a great mix engineer, a great producer, is the combination of all of this knowledge and how to apply all of the things. It's not one thing. It's not one $10,000 compressor. It's not one, microphone. It's not. It's all of it together and the experience and how to use it all together. So I'm all about like sharing everything I know.
Yeah.
Every time I have a breakthrough, every time I post it on Instagram and I put a big long text underneath exactly what I did. And I'm like, I'm stoked about it. So I want to share it with everybody. I'm not like giving away something. I'm not like losing, like, oh, I got to keep this for myself. Like if someone else finds out about this, like they're going to get ahead of me. It's like, it is simply not how it works.
Is that the post that Ricky commented and he's like, oh, and then you muted the vocal?
Yeah, yeah, that's the one. That's the one. I was stoked out of my mind about that, man. I was like, wow, I can't believe, and so I wanted to tell everybody, share it with everybody. If anyone else is struggling with this similar problem, like, yo, check this out, try this. Like,
typically going the long route when approaching a song is beneficial. Like if the minute you start cutting corners, you're cheating yourself, you're cheating the end product.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you can get to a level where you're so good that you can do things quickly, for sure. But most of the time, if you're trying to rush, I mean, people are going to notice it. And they might not think, oh, you rushed it. The song's just not going to impact them as much.
Yeah. Yeah, because what we're doing with music is capturing emotions. We're literally recording feelings with microphones. We're capturing audio feelings. And people tap into that shit subconsciously, whether they know it or not. Like
that believability is got to be there.
That Bob Dylan factor, you know what I mean? Like that's a real thing. It's him off key with a guitar, but you listen to that shit and you're just like, why is this hitting me so hard? You know what I mean? Like, you know, there's lots of examples like that where it's just like, this I'm not listening to a song, I'm listening to a feeling here. I'm listening to like something real, something that was captured.
I think part of like the way I approached this was not only am I not going to rush it, but I also want to do it for myself. I think definitely in the early years, like when I started writing or recording, I had this vision of like, I want to make a dope song. I want people to listen to it so that it's me. It's like a kind of a self-centered approach, which I think a lot of artists have to some extent. But this, I was more like, I want to make the best, you know, based on my resources and knowledge at this point in my life, I want to make the best product that I can make, whether like anyone hears it or not. And if you have that approach, it's like your drive and your reasoning for doing it is very different. And that's why 100%. I don't feel rushed. I'm not trying to, you know, set these crazy deadlines for no reason. Yeah. And then that like passion or that emotion is going to come out very differently. And that's a big thing, man. I don't listen to a ton of artists. I kind of like lock in on the ones I like and follow their stuff and listen to a lot of my own stuff. But if I'm listening to someone I've never heard before, you can tell very quickly confidence, you know, whether they're believing in themselves. Yeah. And
that's so
you can tell important. That in 2 bars.
Oh, 100%. Like,
especially if you're on this end where you're an enthusiast and you're on the engineering side or production side. I mean, you'll notice, you know, a bad recording straight away. Yeah. And you can't listen to the whole song just for that reason. And the lyrics could be good. The beat could be amazing, but it's got to be cohesive, and it's like every element matters. So if you skip out on something, or you biff the reverb, or your mix bus has a shitty chain, and it's the compression is too heavy, and it's just like distorting,
just wrecking all the energy out of it. Yeah, out of the whole everything you work so hard to build.
And for the mixing, man, with this one, I realized everyone's using AirPods. Yeah. Everyone listens to music on AirPods. Yeah. So the likelihood of me releasing something and then that person for the first time ever either listening it to the song off their phone or on AirPods is pretty high.
High 90s.
Yeah. They're not going to have KRK like Rockets or whatever Yamahas at home. No. That's not. So I would actually, when I was mixing, I would use studio headphones. Yeah. I would also use Bang & Olufsen, and then I would use AirPods, and then I would use laptop speakers, and there's even a speaker in my monitor that's like garbage. It's like a mono speaker in the monitor on the back.
TV speakers are amazing for checking mixes on.
It just highlights anything negative.
Amazing, especially to check if your vocal's loud enough or not loud enough, or like. So that's incredible. I love that you use that.
Yeah. And then just having that, like you said, the minute your vocal doesn't sit right, you can go and adjust it. Because certain headphones, I don't know what it is about them, but they have their own kind of like, not an algorithm, but they have their own compression settings.
There's a shape to the sound of them. Yeah. It's not just the way they're EQ'd, it's just the way that they respond to frequencies. I mean, I'm not educated enough to even speak on this, but I can only speculate, right? What's going on behind the scenes. But unbelievably crucial. Even the top guys, man, check them on tons of shit. Tony Maserati's got like he's got like 1999 like laptop or like PC tower, like little speakers that he checks his shit out of. Like everybody, man, you know, Mixed by Ali uses like a, you know, similar thing to what I've got, like a little mono speaker like this, listens to him. He said he does 80% of his mix in mono, you know. And these guys have $70,000 like fucking wall mounted speakers, the best they can get, but like like you said, man, it's gonna sound amazing in the studio, but once it leaves this room, it's going to the consumer, and they're checking it in their busted ass Honda Civic or like, you know, AirPods.
Cars are great for referencing.
Yeah.
But no, man, it's just, I can't stress enough the fact that I love recording on my own because I'm not on the clock.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, studios are great. It has better equipment. Having an engineer can be super helpful. You can just focus on being an artist. But there's something about, you know, this project that I finished has 6 songs. And I mean, if you count the hours, we're like in the hundreds for sure. And there's no way I would go to a studio and book 350 hours. That would never happen. There's no scenario where I can afford that, or an engineer would want to sit there while I like bump up dBs and then I try different headphones. Like there's no scenario where that happens. But if you're working on your own stuff and there's no time limit, then it's fine. So I don't know, man. It's also just, it's like I hit a new learning curve or like a new chapter, and I have a very different idea of why I'm doing this and what the expectation is. And I don't know. It's just growth, I guess, is what it is.
What are some of the things you're using on your vocal chain now that are new or that are working better, or they maybe things that you have discovered or that are surprising you?
So one thing that I never did before, which is going to sound insane, is when I opened a project, I wouldn't set tempo or key or anything. I would literally just start tracking.
Oh, that's brave.
And this time around, I would get a license for the beats so I don't have to worry about it in the future. So I actually have the rights to using this music.
Nice.
And then I would figure out the tempo, I would find out the key, and kind of go from there. Once you have the key, you can swap out the beat later. You can copy paste things, you can move things around, and it's always going to be locked in.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of comfort of knowing like, okay, I'm never going to be off beat, even if things move around. And when you copy paste a hook or whatever the case, you know that's right. You know what I mean?
It's on the grid.
Yeah. So
Oh, I mean, if you're using Pro Tools, it's on the grid, quote unquote. But Logic is the same thing, right? There's a grid, and if you've got it set to your tempo, you chop stuff and you move it accordingly, and it snaps right in. You know.
And that really actually came to light when I was at the end of the project and I had everything mixed, everything, you know, obviously how I wanted it to sound.
Yeah.
And then before I bounce, I'm like, okay, structurally, how do I want this? Do I want to add a hook at the beginning? Do I want to have just an intro with music? Do I want to just have the verse start immediately? Like when it comes to structure, you can kind of do those last minute highlights and drag and drop things and make major changes in seconds.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So if I didn't do that at the beginning and actually set my canvas the way it was with like a 110 BPM or this key, I would have basically set myself up for disaster at the end. And then you're guessing, you're shifting stuff. It's going to be off by a few milliseconds, but like, yeah. So just being diligent, man, is really, really important. But yeah, I feel good about it. I feel good. And that's the big thing is like, you have to be okay with what you put out. Your name's on it, you know?
So, are you using a lot of the Logic stock plugins?
Right,
or,
the chain.
Yeah. What like have you subscribed to any bundles or? Because I know I've tried to turn you onto the
you have
Slate Digital quite a few times. A lot of the Fab Filter stuff. So what have you got going on? Did you try and keep it the same song to song because A, you're using the exact same mic every time, and B, it's the exact same artist in the exact same room every time? So did you change much song to song or?
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Okay, so for plugins, I definitely stuck to stock. I don't know why. It's just like I'm so familiar with how they work and what they do to the vocal.
They're really good. They've gotten so much better since like GarageBand, Logic 9, Logic 10 is like...
Even the last 3 years, like they've come a long way. But once I got everything recorded, I definitely tried to find a chain that made sense.
Yeah.
Where it felt like it was pretty dialed. But I noticed, depending on beats, because, you know, the beats that I chose are not all similar. And then when you come to EQ or even compress, your performance is going to be different. Whether you're more singing or rapping, it is important to go in there and actually move thresholds around, or maybe even change that mix bus. But ultimately, I don't want to make it sound like I have one chain and it's just slapped on. That way the project's going to sound the exact same.
Yeah.
So that comes down to performance though as well. Like, I didn't sit down and just record all the songs at one time. You know what I mean? I took different days. I was in different moods. The air's different. Your attitude's different. So I think that alone, even if you do put the same chain on it, like, you end up with a different product. But no, I kind of went in and I would do different buses. I would do, you know, tape delays or stereo delays or spreaders on different songs. And I didn't necessarily copy paste those things to the rest of the project, because ultimately, you know, people are going to recognize, like, I know a lot of artists probably do that, right? But I don't know. It just comes down to taking time again.
The Phil Collins vocal is like the Phil Collins vocal. You know, he's got that like spreader and it sounds like he's in a small bathroom.
Yeah.
Not sure if you listen to like Genesis or like the Phil Collins stuff, but he's got such a distinct vocal. It's like every song, that's the vocal. Not just like the EQ and compression, but like the actual effect of the vocal.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of like people have came to expect that's what he sounds like. Right? Yeah. But you're right. I mean, you don't want to be just like throwing the same delay on every song and, you know, eighth note every song. Like, some song you're not going to want delay. Some song you're not going to want reverb. But I was just curious about like the actual, just like the foundation of it, building it, you know, with like EQ and compression and stuff. So it sounds like you're having a lot of success with just the stock plugins, which are, you know, again, they're fantastic. How about when you're mixing like the beat? Did you have a lot of stems for this project, or was it like a wave file that you just get from the producer?
So Ray Mosaic actually put me on BeatStars. He showed me what that was. I had no idea that was existed, and I initially had definitely got stems. And I think I've shown you a couple where I tried to do full-blown mixes with like, you know, hours and hours in complex projects.
Yeah.
But really when it came down to it, because I had tempos, I ended up swapping a lot of the beats. So the beat that I recorded on, I'd say almost every song is not the beat that I tracked with.
Whoa.
which is another thing that Ray told me, because he works with some bigger names, and he was like, you know, they'll record maybe 120 BPM.
Yeah.
And they know that they have a good quality recording. The audio's dialed in, the mix is good. And at the end of the day, they can make all these changes to the beat. They could straight up swap the beat. It's still going to be on, you know, it's going to be on that grid. So I had never done that before. But what made it interesting too is when you track a song, let's say you have a hook and 2 verses, and then you swap the beat out, you're like listening to a brand new song. It completely changes the mood.
Yeah.
The lyrics hit you different.
Yeah.
And that swing or that pocket that used to exist could be slower or happier versus sad. It really changes the dynamic. So what I did, BeatStars has, you can basically refine your search to a specific BPM.
Incredible.
So I would have, let's say 110 BPM, go on BeatStars and play my vocal, like the a cappella, and actually just have all my 110 beats, and I would go through and click until I found something that actually resembled it or felt like that pocket fit nicely.
Yeah.
And then I would download it, see if it worked, mix on it. And if it felt like, oh, this was right, then I would set up that license and actually get an untagged version. But at the end of the day, I basically swapped everything out and used wave bounces, not stems. Because one thing I realized is when you have stems, Uncle Ricky said this, you can change things for eternity.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
And it's like, when do you put it down? And you can, on a snare, you can do so much. You can EQ, compress, you can add vocal transformers, you can do all these things. And it's like, at what point are you destroying the mix that you first heard and liked?
You have too many options, and it can be really dangerous. It's like really important. It's really important.
And that was happening to me. So I felt like, you know what, I'll let the producer do his thing, and I'll just be really diligent with finding a producer that is good at mixing and isn't trying to, just throw a limiter on, make it sound loud.
Yeah.
And just get something that is produced properly and has headroom so that I can do what I do.
So you're getting, because that's one thing that like all the new artists I work with, if they do buy beats, I try and tell them, see if you can get the beat without the limiter on it. Because if you're giving me a completely smashed file that's like hitting -6, I can't really do this. I can't take this anywhere.
The vocal's never going to sit proper.
No. So, so you were able to get like unmastered, quote unquote, unlimited with headroom beats, and then that's great. That's like really rare. I find like you have to go out of your way to look to get those.
And part of that is definitely developing some kind of ear and being able to recognize that the producer's doing that. And what I actually noticed just visibly is a lot of producers will let you download like a tagged version, right?
Yeah.
And you bring that into your DAW, you can see that it's slammed.
Yeah.
They'll often slam the untagged sample version because it sounds best. And then if you set up a license and then you download an untagged version and you bring it into your DAW underneath, it's a different shape. Totally different shape. So I think producers, especially on BeatStars, because like that environment seems to be pretty dialed in and they know what they're doing on some level. These producers know, okay, throw out these untagged slammed versions. And then if people want to set up any kind of payment, because there's different licenses that you can set up.
Yeah.
But once you get that, they know. You know what I mean? They don't want to get an email asking you for that. So they've pre-bounced things out the way they should be. And I think that, again, is something that wasn't, available 5 years ago.
A lot of, I mean, nowadays you've got a lot of, these SoundCloud producers that are making a living selling beats. And I'm sure they've, like you said, they've been hit up way too many times where they're getting smarter now. They're getting more efficient, just like we are getting more efficient with recording and mixing. The way that they're, pumping out beats and selling them is turning into a business. And so they're doing it the smart way. And that's fantastic that we can get, heavy trap beats with headroom.
For real. Man, BeatStars, like I was a little hesitant when I saw BeatStars because it was just a new display, a new interface. I'd never seen it. And then the way it works, for anyone that hasn't used it, you find your beats, you can kind of save these playlists so that you don't lose them. You can come back to them, decide if you do want to go ahead with a license. If you do, you can direct message the producer.
That's great.
And ask them questions. Yeah. You can negotiate prices, which is crazy. You'll send them an offer, they can reject it or kind of meet you in the middle. And then beyond that, if you do go ahead with a license, it sets it up in your own little, not a cart, but you have an area of like purchased things.
Okay.
And in that will be your beat, the download, and then the license, the actual like paperwork for it. So it's all there. So you just have to log in.
Yeah.
You always have access to the download. You always have proof of purchase and the name of the producer's there, the name of the beat's there. So you're never going to lose it. I never used YouTube, but I used SoundClick.
Yeah, I remember
and that
SoundClick,
would get quickly messy because I don't remember it having anything like that. where you could save things and you could have a cart of like all the things you had purchased. It was very like email based, and it would get messy and like you would just lose things. So this is kind of one area where they've consolidated everything, and it's a good community where you're right. Producers are straight up making a living.
Yeah.
Artists have one website they can go to, and it has things where you can refine the search for song key, I believe, beats per minute, pop, rock genre, like whatever you're after. So
cool.
It's really changed. Like I used that for the first time for this project, and it's just changed. Man, it's changed everything.
Yeah.
Like it's good.
When you've got like the mix dialed in, you've got your beat, what's going on your mix bus before you send it to mastering? And if there is anything, are you putting that on at the end, or if there's a compressor, are you putting that on midway through and mixing into it? What's going on the mix bus?
So I didn't have anything on the mix bus when I was tracking. I just kind of figured I would deal with that later. But I have 4 things. First thing is a de-esser, which really just gets rid of that sharpness. It cuts at like 2700-ish. It's pretty mild, and it does that dip where it goes in and kind of targets specific areas.
Yeah.
I think the preset that I started working off of was medium high frequency, which is what it's targeting. And then what do I have? Then I do an EQ. I do that secret little dip.
Yeah.
And then I have a compressor, which is the multi-pressor. And that setting has a hard compressor setting. And that, I can't stress enough, it's like magic. You put it on and it just makes the beat hit harder, and it does the perfect kind of like, it makes everything hit harder without any distortion.
And do you find like it's kind of gelling all of the sounds together, like gluing the vocal with the beat as well?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it creates space for things. And then lastly, which is the 4th plugin on that mix bus, is the compressor, that stock Logic, and it has a platinum tape analog preset, which I'd basically just play with the threshold.
Yeah.
And it almost acts as like a stereo delay where it widens the mix and creates warmth. And it's super, super subtle. But I didn't want to go overboard on that mix bus because just like having too many plugins on the chain, you can make things worse.
Oh, yeah.
And then you also have to compensate, or not compensate, but like kind of expect that this is also going to be mastered and leave some room for that. So yeah, if you look at my projects, they're the cleanest they've ever been. They have the least plugins they've ever had.
Yeah.
And just the beds are recorded in a way where it's visibly really appealing, and I can go in and make changes and I know where everything is. So, like you've used Logic for tracking, of course. I did. If you record over the same thing you just recorded, it kind of creates this crossfade area where you can go in and kind of pick sections.
Yeah, it playlists it for
exactly.
you. Yeah.
And that to me was like life-changing, because then when you're done picking what what takes you want to blend in together, you can close it and it's just one clean file.
It makes a master file for you. It's really smart.
And when you have less going on in the project, you can think more clearly and you can focus on, the actual mix itself.
Oh yeah.
And yeah.
Get all those distractions out of the way and just really focus on what's important, right?
Any of that clutter, just get rid of it.
Man, labeling things, color coding things, and just another thing that I've started doing a lot more lately is like, an artist will do on average like 5 to 8 layers of ad libs, and then we'll like comp the ad libs and then I'll just, the stuff that we don't use, make inactive, slide it down to the very bottom of the session so that it's still there if I want to go back to it. I don't hide it or anything, but it's just out of the way so that all the files and the tracks that I'm actually working with are at the top. And if it's not part of the mix, it's inactive and way at the bottom, out of the way. So I just have this clean picture of like what I'm really doing, getting shit out of the way and just trying to make it, seamless and clutter free and then just flows better, you know, you get through it like.
Yeah, it's like if
breeze.
you have a clean apartment or a clean room, you can just think more clearly and focus on the things that you need to focus on.
Totally.
It's like if it's not being used, it's probably in the way. And that's a big part of it, man, is just having, I'm like borderline OCD in that sense. Like I like having things super organized.
Yeah.
And it just helps long term, especially if you're going back into the mix to fix things. You want to be able to locate, like you said, color code, super helpful. And just be familiar with your plugins and why they're in the order that they're in. And this time I completely stayed away from automation. I found that can make things really, really messy. It might be different for someone producing a beat. They might have to rely on that more. But I always found automation was like something that going back to fix after was very difficult. I'd rather use the actual gain plugin on specific tracks or even on the vocal chain itself.
Yeah.
And instead of using gain, if I didn't feel like that was getting the sound I wanted, I would use the makeup knob on the compressor. That to me was like the best way of getting the vocal loud, but having it sit in the mix properly.
Gain staging, like, yeah.
That knob, it's like that knob itself might have changed the whole sound of my project. Like,
yeah, because if you're compressing, you need to make up for it, right?
Yeah.
So that, and then the level going into your next plugin is important as well, right? Like the whole stage. That's something as well, like for years that I overlooked, but it's very, very important, very crucial. When you say what type of automation are we talking about here? Are we talking about like creating vocal delay throws or like automating reverb, or are we talking about just like volume up and down?
Volume.
Type of shit? Okay.
Yeah, that was like, especially when I started doing this, I would just rely on automation. I wouldn't touch any of the knobs, and I'd go in and actually automate. So if like words in a verse at the end, I wanted to be like quieter, I'd actually go in. But then if the beat was too quiet, it would just make things super messy. And there wasn't a quick fix. And I didn't want to have to go in and do all that automation because it's kind of tedious. But yeah, man, just organization is so helpful.
Yeah.
And that's something I think I understood before I even, had the gear set up, was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And these are the stages I'm going to, kind of follow through with. And yeah, it's made a big difference for sure.
When you were doing like mix revisions and things like that after, what were some of the things, was there like a common theme of things that you didn't like that you were fixing more often than not, like in your mix revisions, whether it was like anything like vocals or something,
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with structure.
Yeah.
Just as far as how do I want to present this song? What do I want to, have it start with, end with? How long is it going to be? Do I feel like that last verse is really crucial? And just how do I want to package this? Because those decisions as an artist, it really needs to come down to you. I can't ask someone's opinion for that, because structure is so subjective. And people might think you should have a chorus right at the beginning because it's catchier, and that's like what a pop song is going to be on the radio. But it really comes down to like how you want your project to be laid out, and sometimes things being unorthodox can be beneficial. But as far as like what stood out in the mixing process or the referencing process is, I think I just wanted, nothing to be wrong or stand out in a negative way, so that at the end of the day, when it is done, I can listen to these from top to bottom and feel like I've done everything I can do. And that's sometimes when you prematurely release something, you'll listen to it when it's published or released and you're like, I want to fix that.
Yeah.
So that I don't want to be in that position again, because I've done that before so many times.
Yeah. Yeah. Rushed it, not referenced it on enough different playback systems. And then, yeah, having, or listening to it too many times and not having a break and being out of perspective, right? Like
parallel compression. That was this like perceived loudness is something that I had heard the term, kind of understood how to set it up, but didn't realize how crucial it is, especially when you're going to have somebody listen to it on super low volume and somebody blasting it in their car. If that perceived loudness isn't set up and you don't have that parallel compression, that vocal can quickly become very, very annoying and loud and like painful in the ears. So you helped me set up the compressor for that bus, but it made a huge difference. It really does. Any volume, you can understand the words that I'm saying, which I find is just, and that's what you hear in professional albums, and that's like another technique or a trick that isn't necessarily easy to find out, but it really makes a difference.
Yeah, parallel compression is
it's huge.
Really, really powerful. And creating, like you said, that loudness and like density and energy. I've started putting parallel compression on like buses and actually on the whole mix as well.
Yeah.
And because for the longest time I was, not using saturation and parallel compression to get like dense tracks and harmonics and things that are actually adding up to create that thickness, that sound, that volume. Mastering my songs and then referencing it next to a commercial song, and mine is still a lot quieter, even though it's mastered now, but it's still way quieter. And since I've started like staging using a lot, like the Fab Filter Saturn has become like my greatest tool in the last several months. I've been doing a lot of research on saturation and how to like get perceived loudness and like reduce peaks where you actually like on your meter, let's say you have a snare that hits, there's the main like level of the snare, but then there's that peak that like way up there above the rest of the green part, right? Like the level. Throwing saturation on that controls that peak, gets rid of it, but then it still maintains like the meat, the density of that snare.
It sits different.
And it makes it actually louder without, like, your peak level might be 10 decibels lower.
Yeah.
But the actual signal is the same or louder. And all of those peaks adding up throughout your mix eats up your headroom on your mix bus, preventing you from getting the actual song louder. So stages and stages of controlling peaks, parallel compression, saturation, density. The limiter at the end doesn't work as hard, and overall you're just getting more like, there's just more there. There's more energy throughout the whole song, and that's what our ear hears as like loudness. So that's been such a game changer for me,
right?
And in the last 3-4 months of really diving into that,
and it gives you confidence that there's going to be consistency when people do listen to it, that if you dial in that perceived loudness and the parallel compression, that when somebody bumps it on a Bluetooth speaker at a cottage or again off their phone or in various cars, that the way you wanted it to sound, it likely will sound close to it. Oh, for sure. It just ends up translating better to a lot. Like, because that's the thing, like, most stuff just sounds great when you're sitting in front of your monitors. It's like, it's stereo. You're right there in the sweet spot and you're like, fuck, this sounds great. It's wide. Yeah. You can hear everything. But then like when you bounce that and you take it out of the room and you play it off your TV, off of, a little crap Bluetooth speaker, like it just starts to sound thin and like hollow, and it's just like it falls apart. Yeah. But that like those stages like that I was just talking about, adding all that up, the parallel compression, it just like
it's hard to explain, but it's making more of it is there. It's just more present. It's just more like, it's thicker. It's just it just sounds more like a finished record on more different systems, you know what I mean? And then you can still get that loudness. Like, I've actually gone back and compared some older stuff that I've done, like, a few years ago, taken a wave file from one of my CDs, put them in Logic, and also I'll put like a Nas song and my master on 2 different tracks, throw in like a loudness meter. Mine's actually technically louder, but his sounds louder.
What does it come in at? -9?
So mine was -9.
Yeah.
His is -10, which is a decibel quieter. But that one, his sounds way
wider,
better,
yeah.
deeper, wider, thicker, denser, vocals more forward, but it's technically quieter. And so that was when I got mad. That was when I was like, I've got to figure this out. And since then, I've been on a hunt. I've been on a mission.
Yeah.
And it's paying off, man. Like, all the homework and all the practice and research of how do I get my fucking songs louder?
Well, it's funny too. You'll realize when you come to these epiphanies how long you've been doing something incorrectly.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, shit, that was like 8 years I was doing this wrong.
Yeah.
Or maybe you had a setting that was just, oh, it's locked in, probably don't need to touch it, when really you should be revisiting things that used to be in stone.
Oh, man.
Like, that's part of this project, was doing things from the ground up.
Yeah.
So that every single stage or step was not preset or saved. It was really me like attenuating everything. And that way, if you go through that, at the end, you're aware of why things sound the way they sound. And that's a huge part, because if you listen to a mix and a bunch of shit is like pre-saved or presets, then you're not sure why things are sounding that way, and you don't know how to fix them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I hear people say like, don't use presets. Like, I don't believe in that. Like, for sure, use presets and learn and use them as a learning tool, but then
it's a reference point.
And a reference point. And a lot of them are great. Like, and a lot of them will just get you to a really good starting point. But like I was saying earlier, like with that mix that I did where I just stripped it down and literally started from scratch.
Yeah.
And I got a way better result. And I knew exactly what was happening because I built that. It wasn't built for me. So I knew exactly if something's wrong, I know where to go back and fix it. It's not a bunch of plugins with presets that I have no actual idea what's going on here. How do I fix it? How did I even get to this point? You know?
Yeah, it's insane, man. I had no idea how complex this was when I got into this. It's so dense. There's so much to learn. I mean, you're talking about dudes that are in their 50s and 60s who are still learning and figuring out new ways of tracking.
It's amazing.
So in that sense, it's good because you'll never master it. You know, you'll never know everything.
No, you can't.
And then on top of that, the industry itself is constantly changing its expectations as far as like what an artist should sound like, how loud the vocal is.
Yeah.
That's another thing, man, is the loudness of a vocal is next level.
So much.
Yeah.
It's changed so much. Like, God, the records that I grew up listening to from the 90s, you know, like the Tribe Called Quest, Wu-Tang.
The G-Unit albums.
The early, yeah, well, that's like more 2000s, but I'm talking like 90s, like early 90s, you know, Rakim, Nas, Talib Kweli, all those, like all the New York stuff from the 90s, like, man, the vocals just buried in the mix, you know, like it still sounds, you can still hear what they're saying, but if you play like I don't know, like an Eminem song or a Drake song that came out, like God's Plan or something like that, it's just like, or a Travis Scott.
So digital.
Travis Scott mixes
so
drive
digital.
me nuts. It's just like the vocals like 6 dB above the whole song. And it's just like it's not part of the mix anymore. It's just like the vocals are getting louder and louder and louder and coming forward more and more and more. And it's just like, yeah, it's just the whole landscape is changing of like what's expected, what is acceptable, what is constantly. We're in this game where like engineers are trying to outdo each other. Like, oh, I got to get a louder vocal, and eventually, like, you know, it's like the NFL. It's like or hockey. Look at hockey players from the 70s, and look at hockey players nowadays. That's just a result of years and years and years of players trying to get stronger than the other player, and eventually we've got these gigantic dudes that don't look like hockey players anymore, you know, or football players that are like, they look like Mr. Olympia with pads on because of the level of competition. And it's the same thing. I think the loudness wars is what people talk about a lot nowadays. The loudness wars is a thing for the whole song, but it's also a thing for just the vocal. It's just trying to outdo each record so that yours stands out a little bit more on the radio, you know?
When I mastered this project, I actually put the compression setting on, I think it's high. There's like a low, medium, high. And the high does somewhat distort. But honestly, when it came down to it, I had done a version on medium and a version on high. And the high sounded more like what's out there.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? It definitely changes the mix and the sound. But that loudness is what people want.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're on the medium setting and you max out your AirPods, it's actually kind of like, yeah, it doesn't get as loud as you want. You wish there was like an extra notch. Whereas if you have the high, you can kind of leave yourself actually a notch down and feel like I could go higher.
That's funny.
So that was my reasoning for that. I put the warm setting instead of just the medium.
Yeah.
Again, does something different to the vocal.
Yeah.
But that stuff comes down to personal preference.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like, what do you as an artist want to sound like? And, you know, at the end of the day, when you're listening to it, are you happy with the final product? So
I know that the medium setting on Lander always hits -9. And
that's why you like it.
And it goes to -0.3. Like, because you know, you can set your threshold for your limiter -0.1, -0.2, always, it's perfect every time. -9, 0.3. I'm curious about the loud setting because I have tried the loud setting and it didn't work for me, and I was so turned off by it that I never even go near it anymore. But I'm curious to find out, like, if you bring your sessions into Logic and just throw on it's included with Logic. There's just it's under utilities, I think, and it's just called loudness meter or whatever. I bet you it's probably like almost -7 or something, like the loud setting, because that's what a lot of shit nowadays is. Like I've checked, you know, like, you know, the Drake songs, and, you know, they're loud as fuck. Some of them are get up to like -7. It's like, for me, that's too loud. You know, you start to like squish shit, but hey, that's what the kids want to hear. That's what sounds good on the AirPods. That's what we got to deliver, right?
Also, if you're wearing AirPods in public, if there's traffic or you're at a gym, not these days, but if you're at a gym or you're outside, there's so much other noise that's potentially drowning out what you're listening to, that having that extra 2 or 3 notches of volume allows you to hear it as loud as you want to hear it.
Yeah.
People, unfortunately, aren't super concerned about their ear health or blaring music. People just do it.
I know. I come back, I come, like, Studio B gets rented out by a few different producers, and there's some other sessions that happen in here, and I'll come back like after one of those and look at where like the headphone volume is on the interface, and it's like way louder than I'll ever put it. I'm like, God, these people are deaf. Like, I have to turn it way down, man.
Yeah, it's different when you're on this side of it, right? You're an engineer, you know, kind of like all the technical aspects, and you're going to be super aware of kind of that meter, that -9. No one who's in grade 10 blaring AirPods on a bus going to school is going to give a shit about if it doesn't get loud enough. They might think your song sucks.
Yeah, because loud actually is better. Loud just
Yeah.
sounds better no matter what. Like that's the reality of what we perceive, you know. It's like it's a weird thing, and that's why this is a thing that we actually have to accept. We have to it's real. It's not just a trend. This is like we're dealing with like how human brains work here at this point. Like,
Yeah. And I think that's why I do the warm setting is because when I go to the high, the warm seems to help cater and balance out
some of the harshness or
exactly.
some of the yeah.
Because if you do medium high, it doesn't sound as good. And then the medium almost gives it that analog tape effect. It's just warm and smooth.
Yeah.
And it's not as harsh. And I just constantly don't want my vocal to be harsh.
Yeah. Oh no, that's the most important thing, right? Like that's literally been the bane of my existence for the last 8 years is like like I was saying at the beginning of this podcast, like spending 80% of the time fixing, not mixing. Like why? Because I was dealing with badly recorded vocals or whatever it was. It wasn't sitting in the mix right. I wasn't compressing it right. And it was like, if I want to turn this up, I can't rip my head off because it's so harsh. And that's really hard to do. You know, all the pro records, you turn them up, everything just gets louder and the vocal just stays there, but everything gets louder around it, you know.
Yeah.
Secrets, wizardry, techniques, you know.
Yeah. I do find the fact that these platforms like Lander are available, and it's made it so nice to have all these separate songs mixed and know that when you put them in there as a project, they're going to sound immediately the same level.
I love that you can master a project
Like,
as a whole unit.
Oh man, when I discovered that, it was just next level.
It's almost like, yeah, because that's what you want, right? From the mastering is kind of like a safety net at the end. It's like, check this and make sure that it all fits together for me.
And
like,
turn on the album and listen to it.
Yeah,
Like,
and it's going to sound, you know, song to song, I don't have to touch the volume knob. And their algorithm is fantastic. You know, I've used that a few times to, you know, throw a whole project in there together and it works its magic. It's really good. So we should wrap this up soon so that we can listen to some stuff.
let's do it.
Are we going to be able to hear this project soon? Where are you going to be releasing it? Where can people find you online?
Yes. So basically, I'm going to release it early May. I want to aim for probably the 1st. It's done. So I have the final versions on my computer.
Awesome.
I just need to send them through DistroKid and it will take care of all the publishing, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, beginning of May, probably May 1st. Otherwise, I have Instagram, Tristan Van City, and that's pretty much it, man. Going to put it out and share it. And
cool.
It'll be the best thing that I've been a part of, which is cool.
You feel really confident about that. It sounds like that you've covered all your bases on this one and ticked all the boxes, and you got it the way that you wanted it to sound in your head, right? Like
somebody can listen to it and not like the music for sure. Like that's fine.
Yeah.
If you don't like that genre, by all means. If you don't like what I'm saying, that's fine too. But at least musically, you can't tell me it's off key or that I'm off beat or that things aren't structured properly. Right. And that's the big thing is like musically, I want to be able to, in this industry, have that respect and like set that standard for myself.
Totally. It's there sonically and that you can't argue with.
Exactly.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Right on.
That was fun. Thanks a lot, man.
No doubt. Demo to Limo.
My name is Max Deshaw. This is Tristan Meroni, Demo to Limo, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for listening.
All right, we out.